Hi guys, welcome to my channel and to my Back to Beauty No Buy year. This year I'm concentrating on using my makeup and not buying it. In today's video, I used my makeup to partner some palettes with my Pan That palette for 2019. This series is called Pan That Palette Partners, and it is a collaboration with my girl Angela from Beauti By Angela. She will be listed and linked down below. So the idea behind this series is that each month we pair 4 palettes with our Pan That palette to create a little bit of variety while panning our palettes, as well as getting some use out of all of our palettes throughout the year. I love Pan That palette, but I like to keep it fresh and interesting, as well as I don't want all of my other palettes to just sit around waiting for use while I'm concentrating on my Pan That palette. If you have missed it, I will link the series up in the cards, but my Pan That palette for 2019 is the Jaclyn Hill and Morphe palette. I'm not going to be cracking her open for you today. In a few days, I will have an update on the progress. However, let's go ahead and talk about the palettes that I paired with Jaclyn this month. In the first week of March, I went ahead and paired the BH Royal Affair palette with Jaclyn over here, and this is what she looks like. Let's go ahead and take a look at the looks that I created this week. Overall, I really loved pairing this palette with Jaclyn over here, and I really loved, again, having a matte cream shade to set down my primer, highlight the brow bone, or blend out any of the colors here. This was definitely a fun palette to work with this month. I also did a 3 looks 1 palette collaboration with my girl Angela, which I will link up in the cards. I have heard that this palette is still being seen in like Marshall's, TJ Maxx, those kinds of stores. Otherwise, it is discontinued. But if you do find it in one of those places, I do highly recommend it, especially at a discount. In week 2, I used the Hooda Beauty Emerald Obsessions palette with the Jaclyn Hill palette. I was really excited to use this palette this month, and I definitely put it into the rotation because it was going to be St. Patrick's Day, and I really haven't used this palette since I received it for my birthday in January. So I was excited to use it for the 3 lucky looks that I posted this month, as well as to combine it with Jaclyn over here. Well, this was more versatile than I thought it was going to be. I knew I was going to create 3 green looks for my 3 lucky looks for St. Patrick's Day, but I was hoping to not create 3 solely green looks for my Pan That Palette partners. And I actually think I really succeeded at that. The first look was very green. The second look, I combined green and purple, which I thought turned out really nice. And then the third look was a total surprise to me when I created a pink and green look, which I have been really into lately. But I really loved this sort of olive matte paired with the pink shimmer in my Jaclyn palette. So this was a pleasant surprise. It did take a little brain work or brainstorming, but I think that week went off without a hitch. In week 3, I used my Urban Decay Born to Run palette. I was really excited to jump into this palette because, again, I have not gotten a lot of use out of this since receiving it for Christmas, I believe. So I was excited to pair this with the Jaclyn palette, and let's see what I came up with. So, no word of a lie, in week 3 I was struggling a bit. I love this palette, and I think a theme that you will see today is I'm inspired by the palette that I'm partnering with my Pan That palette, but not necessarily inspired by the two of them together. And that was the struggle in week 3 as well as week 4, spoiler alert. I do, however, think I came up with some really decent looks. I like the cool tone look in day 1. Day 2 was a little rough with the orange and purple, but I think it came together overall. And then in day 3, again with the pink and green look, but I did really enjoy that look overall, and it was probably my favorite that came from this palette. Like I said, I'm totally inspired by this palette all by itself. I can see all kinds of color combinations in here that I really like. I think ultimately the pairings in here that I really liked, I tried to take one color from here and one color from Jaclyn and sort of create the look that I was going for, but splitting the shades up between the two palettes. And then in week 4, I used my Urban Decay Elements palette. Unfortunately, this is discontinued. It was the holiday palette for 2018, but she looks like this, and let's go ahead and take a look at what I created. So, like I said before, in week 4, again, I was feeling really inspired by this palette and the shades that are in here and pairing those together, but not necessarily finding a connection between this palette and my Jaclyn Hill palette. I think overall I got 3 relatively nice looks. I loved this purpley duochrome all over the lid with a very warm crease. That was a really nice look. And day 2, I hated the look, if I'm being honest. I used this burgundy shimmer called Lioness with this like blue-red, blue-brown duochrome called Fortune Teller, and I just didn't like it. I didn't think like there was enough definition between Fortune Teller and Lioness, and it just wasn't my favorite. I also forgot to take pictures until the end of the day, so I look kind of shiny. I like this look. I'm feeling very springy today. I like the green and the yellow together. Overall, what I found myself doing this month is setting up the crease with the Jaclyn palette and then going with a color story from the Pan That Palette partners. Yes, I did use some of the shimmers, especially for brow bone, inner corner, things like that from Jaclyn this month, but most of the pops of colors that I used came from the palette partners. That being said, let's talk about the questions that we talked about last month. I told you last month that every month I'd be answering 2 questions, and the first question is, which was my favorite palette this month and which was my least favorite palette this month? I'd have to say, overall, I think the BH Royal Affairs palette was my favorite. My favorite look of the month, again, was my favorite look from this palette, which was that beautiful pinky berry look. I just loved it. It was so romantic. I could actually see myself recreating that look, and I never recreate looks, hardly ever. So I think the BH was the easiest to pair with Jaclyn this month, and I just really enjoyed it. I felt like the last 2 looks that I created with this palette were something very special. I loved that berry look, but I also loved the green look. It was like the darker green from Jaclyn and then this lime green from the BH palette. So this was definitely my favorite palette of the month. And then, like I said, just being honest, I think the Urban Decay Born to Run was my least favorite palette of the month. I love this palette. I love it all by itself. I was really feeling uninspired with this palette paired with the Jaclyn Hill palette this month. It was just a weird week for me, so I do love this palette. I may put it in rotation again at some point, but definitely was not the best palette for me this month. And then the second question is, did the Pan That Palette partners help or hurt my progress with my Pan That palette this month? And that's kind of a tricky question. I'm a few days out, about a week out from putting up my update for Jaclyn over here, and I'm definitely seeing that I have not made as much progress this month on the palette as I did previously. But I don't think that is because of the Pan That Palette Partner series. I actually think it was because I did a 3 looks 1 palette with the BH Royal Affairs palette, as well as I did 3 lucky looks for March, for St. Patrick's Day. So right there, that was 6 days that I couldn't use my Jaclyn Hill palette, or didn't, or whatever. I mean, there were a couple of looks that I set up with the Jaclyn palette, transitions, things like that, but overall I did see a little bit less progress with Jaclyn this month. Not wanting to spoil the update for you, but I don't think it was the Pan That Palette partners that worked against me. So if anything, like I said, I had a couple of rough weeks with the 2 Urban Decay palettes in terms of inspiration. But if anything, that probably helped me with my Pan That palette, because I did use quite a few shades from Jaclyn to pair with these palettes that I was feeling kind of uninspired with. So that's it. That is my Pan That palette partner update. You will see the next 4 palettes that I will be using for April in my March Pan That palette update. And I hope you guys are still enjoying the series. I definitely am. I'm really stoked about continuing to use all of my palettes and not just my Pan That palette. And on that note, I hope all of your makeup days are absolutely beautiful makeup days, and I will see you in my next video soon.